Today, we're debunking the myth that the personal and the professional are two different things meant to be kept separate. Welcome to the Fierce Authenticity Podcast, where we talk about all things life, love, and leadership with a spiritual and racial justice twist. I'm your hostess, Sharani M. Pathak, and I'm so glad you're here. If you're a returning listener, then I want you to know, every time you tune into an episode of this podcast, you're saying yes to yourself and to living your best life. If you're new here, then you're in for a treat. This is a podcast for all women in leadership with an emphasis on the experiences of women of color who are looking for ways to live their best lives and show up as their best, most authentic selves. If you sometimes feel like a public success and a private failure, or that you have to keep putting on the masks, or that you have to hustle harder than others to prove your worth, or that imposter syndrome keeps knocking at your door despite all of your accolades, then you're in the right place. I'm a relationship therapist, author, speaker, executive coach, consultant, and healer, specializing in helping women like you develop the skills necessary to live your best life and show up as your authentic self at home and at work without having to sacrifice one for the other. In this podcast, we take a look at how the often overlooked link connecting our stories, narratives, and experiences have been shaped by racial discrimination, social inequities, and always having to go above and beyond to, quote, earn our keep. And not only that, we also look at solutions for how to create truly lasting change so that our kids and all the generations that come after us don't have to experience what we did. To get the full story and also understand why this requires more than just mindset work, visit www.fierceauthenticity.com/start here, where you can download a free mini audio training and join our newsletter community where you get access to bonus episodes of the podcast that I don't publicly share, invitations to community-only events like our quarterly Ask Me Anything coffee dates, and first dibs on anything I'm offering. And so with that, let's dive right in. I know that at the end of our last episode, I shared with you that we would be diving into developing a relationship with a higher power. And as I sat with it, I realized we actually need to back up a step and fill in a little bit more information before we take that step to talking about how to develop a relationship with a higher power of our understanding. And because I have given myself permission to change my mind, which is something that, supremacy culture doesn't really allow us. And it's kind of a part of the rebellion to actually give ourselves permission to change our minds. And so because I've given myself that permission, I am here filling in the missing piece of that puzzle before we jump into developing a relationship with a power greater than ourselves, which we'll talk about next week. Today, we're going to be talking about why it is that we're going to start talking about spiritual solutions and why we're going to start talking about relationships with a higher power of our understanding. Because you might be thinking, that's interesting and that's odd. I wouldn't expect to hear that coming from a podcast done by a relationship therapist and executive coach. And so I want to fill in that missing piece for you today. And we're going to be debunking the myth that the personal and the professional aren't meant to intermingle. In short, the personal and the professional are not mutually exclusive as much as we'd like to think they are. Instead, they're an infinity loop where one, usually the personal, informs the other, usually the professional. And they just go back and forth, looping right around in this infinity loop, one informing the other coming back, informing, and back and forth, on and on to infinity. However, because of the systems that we live and work in, we have a belief that we have to keep the two separate, that the personal and the professional have to be separate. They don't intermingle. They don't cross with each other at all. And though there is some truth in that, because of course, when we are showing up in our workplaces and leading our teams, we have to know what are appropriate self-disclosures of the personal. But what I'm talking about here with you today is the fact that your personal experiences, the stories that you have, the narratives that you have, those shape the way you show up professionally, and you cannot separate those two. You bring all of you, including all of your personal life experiences, the experiences of your ancestors, and the experiences of systemic and institutional racism with you wherever you go. And that includes to your workplace. That includes the way you show up and lead your teams. That includes the way that you make decisions about what's a yay and a nay in your company or organization. All of your personal stuff comes with you. Because wherever you go, there you are. You can't separate that, no matter how hard you try. And of course, no matter what the color of your skin is, it's not like you can wipe that off or change it so that you can show up as someone else. You know, I know for a lot of us Black and brown folks that experience a lot of the microaggressions and sometimes even the model minority stuff that goes on, we can't erase, delete, change the color of our skin so that we can blend in, quote unquote, blend in with what is seen as superior thanks to the supremacy. And so all of that comes with us. And it also comes with everyone else who might be interacting with us. And that's one very real, concrete example of how the two are not mutually exclusive and how you cannot separate one from the other. Because again, everything you have experienced, do experience, believe, all of that shows up with you wherever you go. And as I said, it's usually that personal piece that's informing the professional piece. And then we're getting the information back in that feedback loop from the professional back to the personal, which once again becomes personal stories, which then go back and inform the professional, and on and on and on. And I want to share a story here about how it is that our personal informs our professional. And maybe you hear yourself in this story, or maybe you recognize that one of your team members operates in a similar space. Back when I was in grad school at NYU, I was placed in a placement my second year, and my field supervisor was this, in my interpretation, awful, authoritarian, just really mean personality that if it wasn't her way, it was the highway. And I recall her telling me that what I was trying to do wasn't what the social work profession was. And so I needed to get it together. And she thought that I actually needed to be going in a counseling profession and not the social work profession. And there were plenty of instances such as this. And her energy was just this big, overbearing, authoritarian energy. And what it triggered in me were all of my unresolved feelings and all of my issues around my super strict Indo-Fijian dad and how strict he was and how it was always, his way or the highway. And I had to do certain things in certain ways. And because the way my supervisor at my professional placement was showing up, it triggered my personal issues that were unresolved about growing up in my family in the Indo-Fijian culture, which ultimately made it hard to function well at work. And it's funny because I actually had to change my placement, is how bad that was. And again, that's just one small example of how the personal and the professional can't be separated because they are so intertwined. And so as you hear that story, maybe you hear yourself, or you think of some experiences that you've had, or maybe you think of your team members or the other folks that you lead who likely have experiences like this, which impacts efficiency at work, which leads to poor employee satisfaction and poor employee retention, and then impacts your bottom line. Just like in that example I shared, because when it just became too much to bear, I left that internship placement. I just couldn't do it. And then she was left with no intern to support her at her location. And that's why it's important that you know that you can't separate the personal and the professional when it comes to the stories that we bring with us and how we show up at work. I also want you to know that the same way the personal and the professional are not mutually exclusive, the spiritual and the professional are not mutually exclusive either. And not because, you're on a crusade to get others to convert and agree with your beliefs, but because the strength of your spirituality and your relationship with a power greater than yourself informs the way that you show up at work. When you have a strong relationship with a power greater than yourself and you trust in the workings of the universe and you show up with love and kindness and compassion and respect, you show up differently in the ways that you interact at work. And you show up in a way that doesn't require you to have that hard exterior. You get to show up in a way where you can let down those masks because you can see the humanity in everyone you work with, everyone who reports to you, everyone who you support, all of your customers and clients. You simply show up differently. And others feel the way that you show up. And they feel that softness and that gentleness. And that disarms them and allows them to show up in a softer, gentler, kinder way. And when you're showing up that way, and they're showing up that way, there's greater efficiency at work. There's greater employee satisfaction. There's greater employee retention. And there's a greater positive impact on your bottom line and the impact and influence that you and your organization are making in the world. And that's why, starting next week, we're going to be talking about the spiritual solutions and developing a personal relationship with a higher power of your understanding. And I'm going to go more into those nuances and more how-tos and just steps to take And for today, I just want you to sit with this. I want you to think about this. I want you to think about how your own stories from your personal experiences show up at work. And I'm going to back up here and say that showing up with that hard exterior or with those masks on are part of the personal experiences that you bring to your workplace. So just think about that for this week. And when we meet again next week, we'll take this a little bit deeper. And in the meantime, I know this isn't an easy topic. And for a lot of you, it might be a shift in perspective. I know it sure was a shift in perspective for me. And so to support you, I've recorded a special bonus episode of this podcast with a short practice that you can do to take you deeper and to help support you with this idea. And the way you can access that is by going to www.fierceauthenticity.com/start here and checking the yes box to receiving emails and newsletters from me. Again, that's www.fierceauthenticity.com/start here. And I'll be back with you next week where we're going to take this even deeper and even further so that you can start to shift the way you show up at work and the efficiency that you see in the people that you lead. Until next week, I'm sending you so much love. And now for our end credits to acknowledge all of the amazing support that I have in order to help make this podcast possible for you. I want to first honor and acknowledge our podcast editor and the artist who developed our custom podcast music, Diego Velázquez. I also want to honor my amazing assistant, Ana Olvina, who creates all of the beautiful graphics that you see and all of the beautiful design, and who creates our transcripts of episodes and posts them on our blog. Pretty much if you see anything that's beautiful out there on my social media, it's probably because Anna did it. I also want to acknowledge Jillian at Epoxy Studios, because her photography is the photography you see on our cover art and on pretty much every social graphic you see of me. And lastly, I want to acknowledge Source, God, Goddess, Higher Power, and the divine wisdom and love that flows through me to bring these messages to you. Have a blessed and beautiful week. And take really good care.